on our different platforms like LinkedIn and others. This is, like I said, our fifth one, and every year it grows in importance and grows in size. This year, our focus is going to be on a 360-degree view of climate and the environment. As you know, yesterday was Earth Day, and a lot of us celebrated that. Here in San Francisco, where I live, we have San Francisco Climate Week this week, and lots of events going on around the city here as well. My journey with climate started about 18 years ago when I had two young daughters and I decided to do something for their generation and ended up founding an organization that still is thriving today called the Corporate Eco Forum. It's a membership group of 90 of the world's largest companies that have combined revenues of over $6 trillion. So it's the size of one of the largest economies in the world. And that's what led me to really focus in on climate as one of the areas that I got deeply involved with. And now, for the past 5 years at Indiaspora, we also carry a body of work around climate. Indiaspora, like I said, is a global organization. A couple of months ago, we hosted a Davos-like event called the Indiaspora Forum for Good in Abu Dhabi. We had 500 global Indian leaders from 34 countries come together to discuss a diverse set of topics like AI, healthcare, climate change, digital public infrastructure, and most importantly, philanthropy. So we also had an AI summit, and we continue to do work in the AI space as well, amongst other things. Later this fall, we'll have a philanthropy summit. We'll have also a US National Forum. So stay tuned for a lot more activities and a lot more events from Indiaspora. So now let's start with our opening keynote speaker. This is a good friend of ours, a good friend of mine personally. When he was one of our next generation leaders about 13 years ago when we started Indiaspora. But he's now grown up in those 13 years. He was then a student at Stanford. He went on to get a PhD at Oxford, worked for the LA mayor, worked as a chief technology officer at a leading renewable company in India, and also a chief technology officer and growth officer at a large European utility. And most importantly, spent 2 years with Secretary John Kerry in the White House, leading the charge, the US charge on climate change. Since then, he's now become a senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations. And recently, he made a lot of noise with his piece titled Climate Realism. So I want to welcome Indiaspora member and a good friend. And I wish I could have done that much in 13 years than in my whole lifetime. So Varun, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. You're way too kind, MR, and you've done way more from founding Indiaspora to all your work with the Corporate Eco Forum. We are all grateful, MR, for the community you've created. I'm just delighted to be here. I get to do this every year. It's one of my favorite Earth Day events. I'm going to try and not take the full time to just talk at you. I hope we can have a nice conversation and have some questions. And Amita, you'll let me know when I have to stop talking. I thought I'd say a little bit about the climate realism framing that MR alluded to, because I want to address the elephant in the room up front. Look, we are in a far more dismal state of affairs when it comes to climate than even we thought a couple of years ago. When I worked for Secretary Kerry from 2021 to 2022 and 23, we all thought that we were in the midst of this moment of political will around the world where we could actually solve the problem. We turned out to be dangerously misguided. And since then, the attitude has flipped in this dangerous pendulum swing. I don't think we do ourselves any favors to go from unconstrained euphoria to now unconstrained depression. We should live somewhere in the middle by methodically chipping away at this problem over the next 70 years to try and get the world to net zero emissions. And so what I wanted to do here is share climate realism and why it's important to me. Now, what I launched at the US Council on Foreign Relations is a perspective focused on American foreign policy, US foreign policy. I was a US diplomat, right? But the United States is not the center of the world. And for this diaspora, which includes folks from all over the world, I'd like to globalize it a little bit. So I'll set aside some of the America First elements of climate realism. The climate realism framework starts from saying we should be a little less magical in our thinking. and we should accept some hard truths. Hard truth number one is that the world is going to miss its climate targets. This was, by the way, this is true under President Biden, and it's true under President Trump. It was true in 2021, and it's true in 2024. We are going to dramatically blow through a 2 degrees C limit to global warming, a net zero by 2050 global target. We will never meet those targets. And I promise you I have positive things to say at the end, but this is a really depressing thing because it means the world is on track for a 3 degrees Celsius or 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit average temperature rise around the world. And away from the equator, those magnitudes are even larger. And that's going to mean catastrophic impacts here at home in the United States, in India, and everywhere else this diaspora is. The second hard reality is that 87% of future emissions from 2025 to 2100 will come from China and emerging economies. All of the noise that we make in the advanced economies, the United States, the G7, Europe, Australia, the United Kingdom, South Korea, none of it matters very much because those emissions are 13% of the future cumulative total. The trajectory of climate change will be steered by the emerging economy and Chinese emissions. Therefore, if we want to solve the problem, we've got to solve the problem there. And third, there is this magical thinking that the clean energy transition kind of is a win for everybody. It's not true. There are clear winners and clear losers. The United States, by the way, could be a clear loser. The way we're headed, we are the world's largest oil and gas producer, larger than Saudi Arabia. We stand to lose a lot of prosperity and geopolitical leverage if the clean energy transition progresses and the United States does not have globally competitive industry, and China, which currently has domination over solar, wind, and batteries, continues on that track. Taking into account all of these hard realities, I created climate realism to say, let's start from the starting point that every country wants the best for its citizens. What is a reasonable set of policies that we can use going forward in order to address this problem realistically instead of with magical thinking? And there are kind of 3 pillars. Pillar number 1 is recognizing that we're going to blow through our climate targets. Let's prepare. A 3-degree world is a very scary world. We prepare for that world by investing in adaptation and resilience right now. Some countries have more means to do so than other countries, but every country is going to find it economically optimal to invest in adaptation and resilience. I believe we should have what we call an adaptation moonshot, a call for next generation innovations that help us to survive on a hotter, more inhospitable planet, a world in which we have AI-powered advanced weather forecasting to see when disasters are going to hit us days in advance, a world where we have planned at the city level, at the state level, the national level, disaster response capabilities that are 10 or 100 times greater than what we have today. Much of our fiscal space in the emerging world and in the advanced world should be going to adapting to an inhospitable future, and we should be eliminating incentives to do economically suboptimal things, such as develop economically on the coasts or in areas that are likely to be ravaged by wildfires. We need to prepare now for a darker and grim world. I promise there is positive stuff coming. Pillar number 2 is technology. Here's where I'm most optimistic. I believe technology has the possibility of speeding the global energy transition. Let's be clear. There is no global energy transition today. If anybody tells you that, they're lying, because global energy use and production is increasing from every source, not just clean energy. Clean energy may be rising faster, but around the world, it is dirty energy that continues to increase its absolute production, even if its percentage continues to fall. Given that, technology is maybe our only hope of turning the tide and actually having clean energy displace dirty energy. I think, for example, about the next generation of batteries that will enable electric vehicles that are fundamentally superior to current vehicles. I think about next generation solar technologies, nuclear technologies, geothermal technologies. There is a range of technologies where both in advanced and emerging economies, there's a chance to kickstart the energy transition. And if we do it right, for example, here in the United States, if we actually invest in industries where we can win, we have also a chance of aligning our political incentives with climate action. Because remember, American emissions don't really matter that much. We are on the order of 5 to 7% of the future cumulative total. It doesn't matter that much if America goes to zero. What matters is that America develops technologies that India and South Africa and Indonesia and Brazil and China can all use. And if we succeed in doing that, America prospers by exporting technologies. Our politics align with climate action because we make money off of it. And therefore, it becomes a durable political topic. Not every 4 years we change our minds. The third pillar is what I call global cooperation and leadership in order to avert the worst consequences of climate change. Now, I told you we're headed for a pretty bad future, a 3 degrees future, but let's avoid that 4 degrees, 5 degrees future. That would be cataclysmic. And even 3 degrees, there is a risk that we hit planetary tipping points and aren't able to stop this cascade of impacts. So what do I mean by the limited realm of global cooperation to avert the worst impacts? I think of 3 subcategories. Sorry, so I'm going to talk about 3A, 3B, and 3C. 3A is actually stuff that has nothing to do directly with climate. A more free global trading system and a world economy in which we can keep interest rates low is one in which clean energy flourishes. What I'm saying here is upholding the international rules-based world order with largely free trade, avoiding protectionist barriers, makes it possible to have global supply chains where clean energy technologies are cheapest. And low interest rates, because the economy is doing well around the world, enables us to build clean energy, which is capital intensive, much more so than dirty energy. These are just broadly good economic concepts, and leaders in the United States and around the world that support such an economic system, I know I'll be called a neoliberal for this, are actually going to help on the climate transition. What's 3B? 3B is what I call targeted cooperation. I envision a world, for example, where we encourage India to develop next generation clean industrial products. It is economically optimal for India to make zero carbon steel, zero carbon aluminum, produce the zero carbon fuels for long distance transportation, shipping, aviation, and export them to rich countries. It is economically far superior than rich countries trying to do this themselves because they'll fail. It'll be horribly expensive and it will be a net economic drain. I think there's a win-win here, and our trade policy should recognize this. Europe and the United States are trending toward what's called a foreign pollution fee or a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And these policies can be horribly punitive. But if we include carve-outs for next generation technologies like zero carbon industrial products, we have an opportunity to harmoniously coexist with emerging economies that want to produce industrial products for us. And the last thing I'll mention is a taboo topic. MR, I'm sorry for being provocative here. Geoengineering may end up being one of our best bets to avert the worst consequences of climate change. It's a horribly fraught topic. For example, I'm talking about solar radiation management, techniques to reflect sunlight into the atmosphere by pumping sulfur dioxide, sulfates, aerosolized into the atmosphere. That is intentionally pumping an air pollutant into the atmosphere that will kill thousands of people. It's a scary, philosophically fraught way to approach this problem, but it may end up being cheaper. It could cost $10 billion a year, not the $10 trillion a year we need for a net zero transition. And it may enable us to very rapidly cool the world by about 0.5 degrees. If we have access to a tool like this, and we do it in an intelligent way with global cooperation and a lot of research, we might avoid the dangerous scenario where a rogue state, that state, by the way, in the academic literature may very well be India, where a rogue state goes and just unilaterally deploys it in a way that may be dangerous for the global climate or dangerous for human health. So I'll pause there, but I'll say it's time for some fresh thinking on climate. Climate realism tells us to discard all of the things that make no sense and focus on the things that could conceivably make some sense going forward. I'd love to have a discussion about this. Thank you so much for having me. Hope that wasn't too provocative.
That was great, Varun. Thank you so much. We have a question. Can I just read it out to you?
Yes.
Your words on zero carbon industrial products are inspired. Can you speak more about targeted cooperation and the path to this socially? This is by Dr. Haley Mellin, who is actually a closing keynote for today.
I think it's a great point. The political economy of this is the hardest part, right? So imagine, in the east of India, you have your steel production. In the west, you have your refineries. Imagine if you had these industrial clusters, a green steel cluster in the east where you were using next generation technologies like green hydrogen or molten oxide electrolysis to produce green steel, harvesting renewable energy from the sun and the wind. And on the west, you had near zero carbon chemicals production or green hydrogen production. This could be the export engine of India's industrial products going forward. It's good for the world. How do we incentivize India to do it? And how do we incentivize the rest of the world to buy it? Well, the political economy is a little tricky. In India, there has to be a set of incentives that say, hey, there will be an export market if you do this, and you're going to be moving away from coal for your industrial base, and that's going to cause some economic displacement at home. Abroad, in the United States, for example, we have to have a clear carve-out that says if India is willing to go to the expense of developing near zero carbon green steel, we better buy it. Our domestic steelmakers are not going to be happy. And this is a case where we in the diaspora have some political influence and clout. This could be a big one to say there's no good reason for America to try and become the world's green steel manufacturer. We are in the United States an economic superpower that can do far higher value add things. This is a great opportunity for a win-win, but it requires political economy moves on the India side and the US side, the European side, etc. Tough problem to solve, but I think we can solve it.
Amazing. Varun, one more question since we have 2 minutes. If you good with that? Okay.
Yeah, please.
Recent budgetary cuts to the US Commerce Department impact weather forecasting. Is this a problem, or can private sector firms step in to fill the void?
Yes, I think that's Sanjeev's question. It is a
Yes.
super important problem. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is struggling to continue to fund, weather forecasting. As you know, when there's a hurricane coming, you look at the US model, you look at the European model, look at the UK model, and you see, hey, let's make an educated guess. Yes, there are lots of firms that are developing technologies. Climate AI, for example, is a firm run by someone from the Indian diaspora. However, there is no substitute for the deep expertise that the US government has. My hope is we can depoliticize weather forecasting of all things. Why on earth are we defunding weather forecasting? And in 4 years, or ideally sooner, we get that funded again. Amita, do you want me to jump into this question?
Well, yeah, can we do one last one from Shruti, our member, who also runs the IECC? Human appetite for energy seems insatiable. With AI, growth in energy demand in developed world has picked up. How do you foresee models like unlimited energy for flat fees per month aligned with global net zero ambition?
I never want to pursue policies that are what we call degrowth or encourage, force people not to consume what they want to. I get that there's a whole school of thought that says humans consume too much, and that's the problem. I think that's a political loser. We have to focus on interventions and technologies that enable people to have their cake, and we can eat. I don't eat it too. I'm using a bad term, but we must be able to consume everything we want to, have the lifestyles we want, and still solve the climate problem. And that, Shruti, you are a deeply respected expert in the field. So I don't want to contradict you, but I personally think that we have to find a way to satiate energy growth with clean sources. We have to have a dramatic increase in clean energy sources. I will finally say that when it comes to AI, some of you may know that I've founded a company called Emerald AI. And the goal of Emerald AI is to say, we should have infinity data centers. We just should do a much better job of using our existing electricity and power grid and power plants instead of trying to build a lot of new natural gas power plants. And Emerald AI makes it possible for data centers to fit onto our existing grid and build them out much faster. So those are the kinds of technology interventions I think we can make so that we don't ever fall into the trap of saying, you have to consume less, you have to have a lesser lifestyle. It's a political loser, and we'll never get anywhere.
Thank you, Varun. I know there's been a lot more questions in the chat box. Can we email them to you and then maybe connect you with the people and you can answer the questions after the summit?
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to be here. It's great to be a member of Indiaspora. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Varun. This sets the stage for our next talk, which is David and Neil are going to talk about reframing the climate conversation. David is a former New Yorker editor as well as Condé Nast and all the magazines that you probably love. David has been involved with them. Neil is the director of Green Economic Transformation at the New York Climate Exchange. Neil also plays the guitar, sitar, and oud in salsa masala and Indian Latin funk fusion band. So check them out. And David is the son of a Moroccan rabbi and a Catholic Iowan. And so I guess he definitely knows a thing or two about reframing conversations. I'll pass it on to you, David.
Yeah, but not a thing about how to play music particularly well. So thanks, Neil. And thank you everyone for having us. And Varun, I really appreciated your talk. It was super informative. I want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit into how do we talk about these things and who do we reach out to? Because I think that you know, it's one thing that we need to do obviously is develop solutions broadly speaking that are going to address the climate crisis. At the same time, we need to make sure that those solutions are just. And I think that the way that we engage our communities and get them to participate in a movement is to listen to them, understand their needs, and engage locally. And so I think one of the things that, obviously we're looking at this hyperpolarized American political climate that does have global implications. And I kind of want to just unpack what lessons are here that maybe we can apply to our everyday lives, maybe into whatever context other folks find themselves in, when this conversation can feel so needlessly politicized. So to that end, digging right into a kind of policy culture conversation, Neil, I wanted to ask you, 78% of the IRA money was allocated to red states despite quite a bit of opposition to the IRA among many Republicans. I mean, you had Marjorie Taylor Greene going out there saying this is terrible, denying the funding, and then within 2 months later saying I've always supported this. This is the most amazing thing that has ever happened, without actually calling it the IRA. So can you talk a little bit about why you think the Biden administration took the approach it did, and to what effect and what effect do you think the IRA funding has had on the ground in some of these red states with their political constituencies?
Thanks, David, and Amita, thanks so much for having us for this, and Varun for your really excellent opening remarks. Every time I hear you speak, it's a mix of grounding us in the realities, but providing a really tangible and realistic path forward. So I appreciate that as kind of the opening here. And David, I think your question really dovetails perfectly off of Varun's remarks. I think it was both a political and a strategic tactic of the Biden administration to locate a lot of the IRA money specifically around decarbonization, electrification, manufacturing, both to develop industries that would outlive the administration's own presence, and ideally to build some political buy-in for that work. On the political side, maybe the calculus didn't quite work out. But I was actually really heartened. I was at a conference in North Carolina a few weeks ago of just transportation officials, local, state, private sector actors, some researchers, some civil society groups, and all of them, despite the changing political circumstances, despite the changing their own votes in many cases, were extremely bullish on electrification. I think because they saw that, one, they were making money off of it, and they were getting jobs off of it, whether it came to the battery manufacturing in places like Georgia or North Carolina or even Alabama, or just the ability to retrain folks to maintain those vehicles, to produce those vehicles as more of these factories and facilities site there, and also just to develop everything from new grid infrastructure to upgraded infrastructure that these areas needed. I think despite the changing tide, despite the changing climate, there's really a lot of bullishness even in a place like the southeast of the U.S. And I think that despite the political outcome, I think the strategic outcome in terms of folks being bought into this is just the staying power. It was really visible. And I think the more of this investment happens, the more of this development happens, the more people will realize that there are actually adjacent opportunities to build on top of that. For instance, you have this battery manufacturing ecosystem that's developing in a lot of the Southeast. Out of that also comes battery circularity. What can you do with a electric vehicle battery that's no longer has the capacity to be used as an EV? Can have a secondary life as a battery, as a building energy storage system, or as grid energy storage. And then once it has degraded further than that, can it be recycled for raw materials and plugged back in? And even that third piece of it is probably even more resonant and important. because of the trade issues that we're facing, because of the supply chain issues we're facing. And so to be able to recycle materials isn't just kind of this green, sustainable, circular economy play. It's an economic development and business opportunity play that really ought to take advantage of this new electrification ecosystem that's happening there. But that said, even your framing of that point, David, was really important, that so many people that voted against these things are benefiting from these things, including the elected officials that railed against it when they were supposed to vote for it in Congress, but then happily came to the ribbon cuttings. So I wanted to ask you about kind of specifically leveraging your experience as a journalist, that communication piece. Is there a way that we can take some of that? Is there a way of producing those same outcomes, but maybe communicating them in different ways that resonate in different ways that build that political power and that political constituency for the physical changes that we need to see?
Fantastic question. And the answer is I hope so. I mean, I think there's no magic crystal ball to say exactly what the right set of strategies are. I think that right now we're in a really fertile moment to really figure that out, be more strategic with our focus. And when I was at the magazine with the New Yorker, and then also working at Wired, I think one of the things that I encountered a lot was this tension. It's almost a contradiction between the sort of hope-based narratives, like, hey, like these are things that are happening, they're investments that are happening, and they're generative. Here are solutions that are actually working on the ground, which obviously took up a kind of minority of the stories that we would see, because a lot of the times there's I think an implicit bias within media to say, hey, this is something that we think is really newsworthy, and oftentimes those are framed as threats, which makes sense, right? The administration is going to do XYZ, so we should feel threatened, be aware. That's what we define as being newsworthy. So I think that in the last, I would say 5 or 6 years, there has been a sort of slow shift, and there's some new players on the ground, right? Like there's Heat Map, there's the Grist, folks who understand that there are smarter ways to have climate conversations within a media context. I think now that I've kind of transitioned out of traditional media as just like my full-time thing, I mean, for everyone here, I think I want to be very clear. Big reason why I did that is not because I don't think that media and journalism don't have a really important role to play. They really do. It's that I think that it's just really important for us to figure out how to communicate strategically to specific groups of people who might be left off the table, people who are already sold into climate change. They know that it's happening, they care about it, but maybe they feel defeatist in some kind of way. Jenny Odell has this great line. She's an amazing author. I encourage everyone to go check her out. She has this line about declinism, this idea that that the future is kind of inevitable, and what that future is nothing that anybody wants to kind of be a part of. And so you shut down, you retreat, and it makes sense. It's kind of just like a survival strategy. But what this moment demands is, I think, a different kind of mindset. And so the way that we engage people, the way that we talk to people, and who we're reaching out to demands trust. And a lot of these kind of media apparatuses, I think, because they become so politicized, their ability to do that with some of these key constituents. And what I mean by that is maybe folks in purple states. What I mean by that is like my uncle who lives in Iowa, who I think I could totally get on board, and I've already seen some glimmers of hope there, right? It's not going to be the New York Times that does that, but maybe I'm a vehicle by which the information of the New York Times, I can use that information, figure out how can I translate this with a sort of 1-2 year horizon, maybe more, so that we can actually have real conversations. Because I promise you, I think this like gut feeling that like we're never going to be able to convince these people, I just don't think that's true. That may be true for like 20-30% of people for whatever reason. They just get the messages, and there are some bad faith actors in the media ecosystem, so they're kind of set in. But there's a lot of people that we're just kind of leaving off the table, and there are a lot of people already bought in who just need to be kind of nudged to action. So anyway, I know that we're getting a little bit behind on time. So I just kind of want to, dig into the next question there, which is to you, I'm wondering, as we sort of bridge the gap there, we have partisan media doing partisan things, people becoming, more, let's call it, immune to messages that ultimately they could get inspired by and maybe compel them to do something interesting, either whether that's with their local politicians or maybe in supporting a local business initiative, whatever it might be. Can you tell me a little bit about how that partisanship has kind of actually played out on the ground with different stakeholder groups? And then as a part of that, I'm just kind of wondering if you can sample how disinformation or misinformation, like what you do when you're confronted with that, when you're actually trying to drive forward a solution.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And actually, I wanted to respond real quickly to a point you made about the types of media and how things are covered. I think, as you said, dooms get clicks, right? Scary stories get clicks. But two things that I really appreciated. One thing was Jigar Shah, from the recent administration, just said that he approaches every story with a 10-day lens. He'll hear it, but he really won't listen to it until 10 days after. Is that still the headline? Or has it kind of faded away because, it was just something to get those clicks in the short term? And even Vox, I heard that they were changing their climate coverage a little bit to say, all right, they're going to be flooding the zone with different stories that scare us on the climate side with different tidbits here and there. But rather than covering every scary potential message, we're going to wait for and see the effects of those things. And, if there are genuine defunding issues, if there are genuine deregulation or regulatory changes, we will cover those, of course. But we're going to wait until we actually see something rather than just kind of the pronouncement, because very often we can get scared of those scary announcements. But the real tangible impact is a lot different from that. But that said, I think you also raise a really important point about the way that we talk about things. In my last role, I was leading industrial strategy for the city of New York and was working on the city's green economy action plan. And I think that, it was the framing of green, the framing of even climate was super helpful for all of us that were bought into this idea. It was an easy shorthand to say everything from decarbonization to resiliency to advocacy around it and all of that. But the reality is that a lot of the people doing the brass tacks on the ground work do not think of that work as being green. One of my favorite examples here is a welder who is welding a wind turbine does not think she's doing a green job. She thinks she's welding a wind turbine. She could well be welding an oil tank, but she's welding a wind turbine. And her identity as a welder does not change. Surely what she's doing changes, but from the perspective of the brass tacks work that she is doing, the way she thinks of herself and of her identity, it is that. And frankly, in many cases, we have to think about how even just that framing that animates many of us on the kind of pro-climate side of things can itself be very harmful. So I work very closely with a lot of organized labor, and even in their own internal communications, most folks in this world love the work that comes out of decarbonization, love the work that comes out of electrification, love the work that comes out of renewable energy. Don't love the word green because it sounds like, frankly, a whiny liberal. And so this is a huge constituency that is immediately turned off by just that word. And so even in the internal communications of a lot of organized labor, they don't use the word green to describe these things that we would use as a shorthand. And so I think there's even just the lexicon that we employ, that we choose to describe these things that we, to your point, could all care about and do all care about. I think that's something that we should, that it's maybe in fact a silver lining that we can of this current moment. It can prompt us to rethink some of the words we use, some of the ways we approach these things, and frankly, sometimes the dismissiveness through which we approach it.
I just want to quickly on that, maybe we can just get two more messages before we segue into audience questions, because I really do want to hear from you all on what you think. When conducting kind of some research here with different stakeholder groups, different audiences, that is the thing, is that there are ways in which people can connect to climate. There might be health issues. There might be it might be some toxic thing happening in their community, and that gives them a sense of disgust and it mobilizes them that way, right? There's so many different emotions that people can experience, but those structural benefits, right? Like I have this job, I think of it as just my job, but I now am attached to that. I want to protect that. And the people in my community want to protect that too. And so finding the language, all of those are opportunities to actually just connect with people on like the kind of brass tacks. This is a dinner table thing. And that's kind of what's missing right now. I mean, if you look at the data from last year, the 2024 election, you can see the spread of what people trusted Democrats versus Republicans on. And it was like a slight favorability for Republicans, which, by the way, on the economy, which was like the number one issue over and over and over again. I mean, more important than all the other issues by a large margin. And it was a slight, right, like preference for Republicans on the economy. But if you look at like if you look at climate, you'd see that there's actually a big swing in favor of Democrats because we support the climate. So what does that tell us? It tells that people don't really understand how this is connected to this, right? And so we need to kind of bridge that gap, and we need people to connect it every day. Americans or people all around the world understand these things, understand climate as also an opportunity, economic opportunity, as a way to execute a vision for the future that is more healthful, that is also more just. And this is how you get people on board with this movement, with this, and with these policies, I think, in the long term, so that we can avoid some of this political whiplash, which is just getting us nowhere.
Your specific point, frankly, your uncle in Iowa, he gets a greater proportion of his electricity from wind and probably broader renewables than we do here in New York.
And you want to know what's crazy about that is that he will then look out at the windows and be like, but my landscape, but he can be one too, that's the thing, is like even he now 10 years later is turning around on windmills. So it's like there's lots of glimmers of hope here. Anyway, so we are almost out of time. So maybe you can just give me one last statement. Like, what is a thing that you think for these folks, one last takeaway that maybe we didn't quite touch on that you want to?
I think just there is so much opportunity here in how we talk about this and frankly how we deliver these things. We were chatting a little bit, just about how there is the narrative piece, but then there's also the lived reality. And I think those need to come together in a stronger way. So one example really close to home in New York is this recent congestion pricing, the congestion charge that's been implemented. Very important. It needs to happen both for the sake of generating new revenue for mass transit, but also for the sake of minimizing congestion and air pollution. The challenge that we here in New York did not learn from places like London, from like Stockholm, from like Singapore that had done this prior, was they gave people alternatives before that pricing came in, before those costs came in. And so this really important policy just meant that I was paying more to do what I wanted to do. I didn't have a better service, that I didn't have a better alternative. And I think even the way that we think about some of sequencing here really should come back to what's the alternative, how can we make this alternative that, to Varun's point, will come with consequences, will come with disruptions. How can we make the alternative seem like the preferred alternative? How about you,
Totally
David?
agree with that. I think that for me, there are probably three things I think we probably left off the table that are really important to emphasize, which is that the role of people that people trust. Sorry, the role of trusted messengers. So you have people in these communities, faith leaders, but it's also you too, right? I was at an event yesterday with the Grist, and one of the things that they were saying was that I wish we had more philanthropy to digital influencer pipeline. I wish that was a more robust pipeline. I wish also people understood who influencers are locally, a more kind of expansive sense of influencers, and that both of those are levers that you can pull to kind of get people, that you can use to get people engaged. And then I think the last little bit of that on that kind of hope and local action, I am someone who was very late to the climate game. I'm going to be totally real with everyone. I was covering lots of different things, mostly big politics background, but also some music in my role at the New Yorker. And I think that just being able to connect with people who are deeply invested in this was inspiring because they saw it as something that they had a positive vision of the future that they wanted to manifest. And I found that to be enviable. I found that to be desirable. And I connected with them on why it is they were doing it and the urgency of the moment. And I think that my next point was like, okay, well, then what do I do with that information? And I lived in that moment for a long time, right? A little bit of climate depression, a little bit of like, okay, but what's my next step? And so I think the thing that I would really encourage folks to do is to also think, is to like just zoom into the people who are right around you, who maybe do want to be more involved, and to understand what those kind of local actions are that they can do. Because I think there's just a lot more work that we can do locally with our neighbors, with people in our communities, to help them all understand to the point of Varun's like, you know, climate adaptation and resilience, right? We're going to need to focus on that because I'm with you, like 2.5, 3 degrees. I mean, let's hope that we can rein this in, but we're not going to really be able to do that unless movements also are local, because that's how we get people who don't necessarily totally ideologically agree with us, but we can build up centers of power that then trickle up. So anyway, I think that's kind of like a big thing that I just want everyone to think about. Think locally a little bit more, and also don't leave out the piece where there are some real structural disadvantages here for some of these communities. A lot of the people who are most marginalized would be most affected. So it's like one thing to say, great, we're going to have this kind of all the cake for everyone. But meanwhile, you know, there's going to be many of us who still suffer from the kind of structural disadvantages that can come with, you know, globalism. So just try to keep that part in mind so we can safeguard those communities as well. Yeah, questions?
Yeah, you know, we're running a
time?
bit late, but
Yeah.
we have someone who joined from Brussels, Belgium. So I'm going to read out their question. And maybe in 30 seconds, if you guys could weigh in. They're saying, totally agree regarding thinking the language we use to talk about climate. Most people don't care, not explicitly at least, about emissions or the planet's temperature, but they care about clean air and health, about sanitation in their cities, about dealing with the flood event. And media/journalists hold an important role in translating and making these links more clear to the average person. Curious to know if you have examples of great climate journalism. And this is Kruti Munot from Belgium. 30 seconds.
Real quick, my
Neil.
immediate response, sorry, my just quick immediate response is some of the best and most effective climate journalism that I've seen is not climate journalism. It is automotive journalism. It is utilities journals that are talking about the opportunity within those sectors that are effectively solutions to climate change, but are not frankly targeted in that way. And in many ways, those have the biggest impact on the targeted audience than anything else, a lot of other things that I've seen.
I completely agree with that. I think that is kind of a point of emphasis. And if you're just curious to sort of engage with other like more long form stories that are very climate focused, I would encourage you to check out Bill McKibben. He's been a huge help to me and I think has inspired me big time. So yeah, that's what I would say. Thank you everyone for everything.
Thank you so much, David.
big time.
That was such a
And
thoughtful.
thank you, Neil.
Appreciate it. Thanks, David. See you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce Parul, the moderator for our panel upcoming. She is the Managing Director of Mobility at Stanford Doer School of Sustainability. And when Parul is not working, she is still being a huge genius by spending time doing robotics. So welcome, Parul.
Thank you so much, Amita. And it's a pleasure to host this power-packed conversation. We have a really great panel of experts who bring a very rich and global perspective across business, finance, policy, governance, and philanthropy. So we have just about 30 minutes for the conversation since we are running behind. So I'll jump right into it and introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Dr. Rajiv Lall, who was the former chairman of IDFC and is the co-founder of Mondiale Impact. We have Parminder Kohli, who is the chair of Shell UK and Shell Group Executive VP for Sustainability and Carbon. We have Dr. Navroz Dubash, who's a professor at Princeton University and also a visiting senior fellow at Sustainable Futures Collaborative. And we have Neelima Jain, who is the Director of State Initiatives at IECC at UC Berkeley. So welcome, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I request the audience, as we get into the conversation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll keep a few minutes towards the end for getting into them. All right, so to kick it off, a question for all the panelists. From your unique vantage point, what do you see as the biggest challenge and opportunities for India, for climate solutions specifically in India over the next 3 to 5 years? And Neelima, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Parul. And firstly, thank you to Indiaspora for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be participating in this timely forum. I think I see a lot more opportunities than challenges. India has a unique advantage. It has, it has scale, it has need, and it has capacity. So I see a lot of technology opportunities, cooling, electrification, and also I see a bit more of sustainability and industrial and trade policies coming together. And I don't see that India is. I don't see challenges. I definitely see, India making use of these opportunities in a big way.
And if you'd like to pick it up, Navroz or Parminder?
Right, I'm happy to have a go. Likewise, a real pleasure to be here in this audience. I think many of you might be aware of Shell in the way we looked at Shell scenarios. This has been Shell's approach to looking at long-term trends. And we did an India-specific scenario called Sketch a few years ago. And I think just in terms of, it's always good to see what the distance the country has traveled. So looking at emissions intensity of India has gone down by about 35% since 2005 baseline. And the objective is by 2030 to bring it down to about 40-odd%. So there's already been quite a bit of work done to reduce emissions intensity. And I think the contribution of non-fossil fuels in electricity generation is at about 40%, going up to 50% by 2030. So I think there's a long road travel, and Neelima brought that point about electrification. But I think as we look into the future, we got to be conscious of the trilemma that all countries, not just India, are navigating of energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. And I think in that context, the challenge will remain, because if you look at our scenario, which we did along with Terry, most people would know Tata Energy Research Institute, was that, even up to 2050, hydrocarbons still make up 60% of the total energy requirements of the country, though there'd be explosion in the size of the electrification of the country and other renewables. But I think it's just conscious that, as the population increases and the wealth in the country improves and people consumption increases, there would be pressures on navigating this energy trilemma for the country. And that is also the collective challenge, not just India has, but it magnifies in the context of the size of India.
And Rajiv, if you want to pick it up.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it's a good segue from what Parminder just said, keeping up with the terminology of the trilemma. I think that India has done a very good job so far of shaping the narrative around climate alignment based mostly around the concept of energy security. And that's how I feel that the government has really taken the lead in developing the framework that has enabled widespread greening of the electricity sector. The challenge now is to address the second part of that trilemma, which is to convince people that climate alignment is actually very good for growth as well. And that's where I think there's quite a lot of work still to be done. But I'm optimistic because the trade-off between climate alignment and growth is becoming more visible to the general public. And they don't see it as a trade-off between slowing growth and investing in climate alignment, but they see it as the side effects of the growth model that we have currently. So pollution, the health-related aspects of all that goes with it, I think those are powerful and emotional triggers that can be used to develop a momentum around the climate and growth agenda.
Yeah, well said, Rajiv. And that ties back to the previous conversation and about connecting, reframing the conversation. And Navroz, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Parul, and thank you to Indiaspora colleagues and organizers. Very pleased to be part of this great panel. So look, I think that in terms of the opportunity, one way of thinking about it is that India is still developing, which is, of course, a challenge that defines, as Rajiv has just put it, our objectives. But it is also an opportunity because we haven't locked into development pathways yet. We haven't locked into infrastructures. We haven't locked into job creation possibilities. We haven't locked into how our cities look. And so this is a chance to actually envision and build both low carbon and something we haven't talked about yet so far on this panel, climate resilient pathways to development. So that needs to be the framing. And then the challenges, I think, the first challenge is actually getting this framing fleshed out and understood. Have we internalized yet in India that development, that there isn't a high carbon path to development anymore? If you are a high carbon country in 10 or 15 years, you're likely an uncompetitive country. And similarly, if you're not a country that has taken into account climate impacts, you're probably a country that's not ready for the future. And so development is inextricably kind of woven with both low carbon imperatives and resilience imperatives. And I don't think we've knit that story together yet. Two more quick sort of challenges. I don't think we quite have the knowledge and capacity yet to flesh that out within the government and externally. We have shoots of it here and there. It hasn't been pulled together. And maybe we'll come back to this point when you talk about institutions and governance and so on. And the third point is something others in this panel know much better than I do, but I want to flag it here. Most of these transitions are high capital cost transitions, and we're a capital scarce and high capital cost country. So that's going to be a big challenge. Let me close with that for now.
Yeah, perfect, Navroz. And you hit on some of the very important points that we'll get into in the conversation. So just sort of starting with the first one around capacity and knowledge in the government. And in your work, you've long emphasized the importance of having effective national climate institutions. So how can developing countries like India establish such structures that balance developmental priorities with climate action?
Well, no, thank you, Parul, for picking up on the strand of my work. You know, as soon as you say things like institutions, everybody kind of starts snoozing, and it's a challenge. It sounds very dry. It sounds like, you know, what exactly are we talking about here? But maybe one way to tell the story is to say, even if you look at something like the Paris Agreement, right? It encourages countries to set targets. Who is actually going to decide whether those are viable targets? Who is going to decide how those targets are actually implemented? Who's going to track whether we're in compliance with it? So most countries have signed on to the Paris Agreement, but they haven't built a machinery that actually figures out how to make that a reality. And especially if we're taking an approach here that this isn't about carbon regulation, this is about integrating into development, then you need an all of government approach and an all of society approach. Typically what many countries do, like India does, and we're not unusual, is you hand this over to the Ministry of Environment. So under the conduct of business rules in India, climate change goes to the Ministry of Environment. Ministries of Environment around the world tended to be undercapacitated and underfunded, but more important, their jurisdiction doesn't stretch to areas that matter for climate. It doesn't stretch to urban development. It doesn't stretch to power. It doesn't stretch to mining. It certainly doesn't stretch to, they don't have control over the finance. So how do you build structures that lead to connective tissues across all these ministries with a politically backed strategy that is kind of sold through government? And in countries like India, also extends to states, right? At the same time, you have to build out horizontally to the private sector and to civil society. So these have to be kind of porous institutions which enable conversation and flow. It's not that easy to do, but I think that's really the challenge. And let me just sort of try and sharpen it by saying there's three governance things that really have to be met. One is knowledge and strategy setting. You have to chart a course to the future but not be dogmatic about it. It has to be an adaptive strategy. Where do we think the jobs are going to be? Where's India's comparative advantage in the green energy space, et cetera, right? The second is the coordination role I talked about across ministries and across levels. And the third is really important, and South Africa has actually led the way on this. When you have these kinds of big structural changes, because these are structural changes, this isn't just like a policy, tweaking a policy, right? You're going to create some losers. You're going to create some people left behind, whether it's coal miners or whether it's people in coastal areas. So you have to have some institutions that mediate that conflict, that help ways of making sure that winners compensate losers, and that those who are going to lose from these transitions don't feel the need to mobilize politically to block the change, right? So that's sort of finding a way of making this happen in a way that is also just is really important. A, because we think things should be just, and B, because we want to actually get something done. So I think that's my best shot at trying to explain why we may need to pay some attention to institutions.
Yeah, so many pearls there that I would love to dig into further if we had the time, Navroz. And maybe building upon that, and Neelima, I know that in your work at IICC, you're focusing a lot on heat resilience, and you have in the past led Ujala, which was one of the largest zero subsidy energy efficiency program across 60 million Indian households. So you have this unique experience in large scale implementation through a transition. What lessons do you think we can apply from that experience to delivering affordable residential cooling, particularly as India's demand for cooling rises?
Thanks for that thoughtful question, Parul. I mean, as you may know, nearly 90% of India lies in zones that will be classified as extreme heat danger. And not surprisingly, India is on the brink of a residential cooling explosion. You know, we are expecting 130 to 150 million new air conditioners to be added in the next decade. Now, that kind of growth could add nearly as much to India's peak electricity demand as Japan's entire peak load today. If we don't get the affordability and efficiency right, you know, speaking to Navroz's point on just, if we don't get that right, we are locking ourselves into high household bills and potentially looming power shortages. When the government of India launched Ujala, it wasn't just selling affordable LED bulbs, it was shaping an entire market. We leapfrogged millions of households from incandescent bulb, which was the most inefficient technology in lighting then, straight to the most efficient lighting technology available globally. You know, prices dropped by 75% in just 3 years, and the program reached over 100 million homes. But this was done through simple levels, you know, bulk procurement, demand aggregation, transparent technical specification, and easy consumer financing. Now, the challenge with cooling is different, but the playbook still works. First, we need to raise the floor, not just the bar on efficiency. Since 2016, India's minimum energy standard for air conditioners has barely budged. Even though hundreds of far more efficient models are already on the market, today, India's one-star label, the minimum floor, still allows ACs that consume 25 to 30% more electricity than what's already possible and affordable. Now, that's what I mean by raising the floor. Let's reset the minimum standard to match what the market already delivers. And our center is working very closely with the government on this. And we've just published a paper on this as well. Now, the second is bring down prices through large-scale aggregated procurement. As I said, India has a rare advantage. It has a massive domestic market. If we leverage that scale smartly, like we did with LEDs, we can drive costs down, not just for ourselves, but for global markets too. And lastly, make these products financially accessible through EMI models or on-bill repayments, just like Ujala. We should democratize access to efficient cooling, the way we did with lighting. Cooling is no longer a luxury in India. It's a public health and economic imperative.
Yeah. Well said, Neelima. This is certainly very top of mind as the summers are just around the corner, things are heating up. But moving gears a little bit to what Navroz had mentioned earlier about, this being a high cost, capital intensive, this being a capital intensive transition, and we are a high capital cost country. So, Rajiv, with all your experience around funding institutions of different shapes and sizes, I wonder how we can attract and direct private capital towards climate solutions while addressing developmental priorities. And I also see that one of the audience members, Sumit, had also posted a similar question. Seema, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that, Parul. I think building on what Navroz has said, and in some ways it's also implicit in what Neelima was saying. Our best prospect for raising capital is not to try and carve out finance specifically for climate. I think the challenge is to raise capital for more climate resilient and more climate efficient growth, but the accent is on growth. So we have to develop frameworks that make the application and implementation, adoption of newer technologies at scale profitable. We've done that to a large extent, not without its problems and residual challenges for renewable energy. But a similar approach can be taken to developing and encouraging business models with the right mix of regulations and policies that create opportunities for investment in things like cooling and transportation, even in agriculture. So the key is getting a trusted, reliable regulatory and policy environment in place. If you have that, and investors see the opportunity to deploy even newer technologies profitably, I think you'll be able to attract the private capital. I'm not one of the advocates for specialized solutions, financial innovation, different kind of products to attract, different types of capital just to address the climate problem. I don't think that's the answer.
Yeah. Fair, Rajiv. And moving on to you, Parminder, I also see some questions for you in the chat. But your role at Shell, Shell, all energy companies have a very important role in the energy transition. So you've seen both corporate capital flows going into that, but also Shell Foundation does a lot of work in India and East Africa for energy access. Could you share some examples of the biggest successes that you've seen through this work?
Yeah, so I'll maybe just, in interest of time, just speak to Shell Foundation. I mean, first of all, it's a completely independent thing to Shell. It was set up by Shell about 25 odd years ago, but it works as a completely independent charity, which was worked with the endowment from Shell, but then it does a lot of work in poverty alleviation and energy access and clean technologies for really the poorest communities in East Africa and Asia, predominantly India, by the way. So let me just share. I mean, I think I was quite astounded. I joined as the board member just last year. So, I've only been involved directly in the last year just as a Shell board member, but the board is completely independent. So over the last 20 years, it has improved the life of about 280 million people and has attracted about 10 billion of additional finance into the leverage energy solution. So just another example of kind of how do you crowd in investments in difficult to reach communities and technologies. And just to give it some life on some 3 examples which I picked up, which just kind of bring it to life. One is probably close to Neelima's heart on cooling, but in a slightly different way. But this is to do with some examples we've had trialed with the Kenyan dairy farmers. So up to about 290 million liters of milk is just wasted because you can't get it to the customers, and especially the overnight milk collection. 40% of these farmers are women. And SureChill is a partner of ours, which was doing medical refrigeration. So, bringing this cooling as a service to these farming communities. And actually, 40% of them have, what the data says that 123% increase in the daily operating profit, but because they could preserve their milk for longer. So just gives you an example. Then closer home to India, partnering with a partner called S4S Technologies, which supports women entrepreneurs to convert farm losses to food ingredient versus with solar dryers. So this is bringing drying into food processing, because a lot of these vegetables were just wasted because they couldn't get to the market, and they would just get, or they would have to be sold at really below even the production prices just to get rid of the product, because they could not convert it into higher value products. And using solar drying, again, that equipment and bringing that to the farmers, 25,000 tons of food has already been saved by these women. And it talks about one farmer increasing her income by 50% by reducing the food loss. So, and finally, there's something about solar irrigation as well, bringing that to a lot of the farmers who are not able to get the high yield and productivity because of lack of irrigation facilities, and bringing again, decentralized renewable energy to these farmers which do not have access to energy. So that's what the foundation does, and that's why it's been able to impact positively incomes and lives of more than 280 odd million people across these emerging countries.
Yeah, fantastic, and really underscores the role that corporate philanthropy and philanthropy can play in general, in addition to private capital. So I'm seeing a very vibrant discussion in the chat, but maybe just a couple more questions before we move to those. So this is the elephant in the room, and Neelima, we were talking about it in our prep call. With the current US administration, a lot of the space is really heavily impacted. And you highlighted the domestically driven nature of the Indian economy. How do you see this impacting India, if at all? And yeah.
Yeah, yes, the US matters, but clearly India's climate and energy trajectory is increasingly shaped by domestic priorities and long-term economic logic. Let me break this down into 3 quick points. Okay, first, much of India's climate progress to date has been domestically driven. We built one of the largest renewable energy capacity in the world, or ran one of the world's largest energy efficiency programs without relying on US finance or supply chains. Right? India boasts the lowest capital cost of solar among all major global economies as a result of the supportive, innovative domestic policy regimes that it has been able to lay out. Second, our climate ambition is shaped more by energy security and affordability, more than diplomatic pressure. It's a well-known fact, India imports 88% of its crude oil requirements. So transitioning to clean energy isn't just a climate move, it's a macroeconomic imperative. Our domestic manufacturing push under schemes like PLI it's all about jobs and industrial competitiveness. Now, third, if I may, India works best in a broader ecosystem of alignment. Yes, US is a key partner, but so are Europe and MDBs and Japan and Australia and growing South-to-South partnerships. Our ability to shape domestic demand for green steel or for solar or for EV is what really moves the needle. And I believe we have a rare combination of scale and consumption and capability to be a key shaper of that climate industrial ecosystem. However, there is one caveat. The tariff shifts are obviously redrawing clean tech supply chains. There's a risk of trade diversion. And India could find itself, absorbing surplus steel or solar or EV components that are being shut out of other major markets just because they're more carbon intensive or less efficient. And I think to protect our own green industrial base from becoming collateral in this realignment, India will need to do 2 things. One is strengthen the domestic standards so that we are not seen as a low bar dumping ground for high emission products. And the second is, let's just accelerate the scale and competitiveness as far as clean manufacturing is concerned. So we are not just a passive recipient of redirected trade, but a preferred supplier in the new global green economy.
Yeah, lots to consider there. And then perhaps, I'm seeing there was a question for Rajiv in the chat, which Navroz +1, so gonna pick it up now. But Rajiv, how far are we from what you suggested is necessary for directing capital? Where does the appropriate policy and regulatory environment, what needs to be done to create that for directing capital?
Yeah. So I think we have made some progress. All the things that Neelima was talking about. We have developed a pretty robust policy framework, which happens to be climate aligned. But because we've been driven for political economy reasons by the objective of energy security and affordability. I think we need to build on the momentum behind the slogans of this current government. There's the Viksit Bharat slogan, and there is also the quality of life that this administration keeps talking about. Under those two very large political agendas, I think there is room to develop a coherent regulatory and policy framework, tariff policies, accompanying industrial policy, building on the PLI scheme, taking advantage of the opportunity to make India a manufacturing base, all of that to actually integrate climate considerations into our growth model. To Navroz's point, I think this is a very important point. We can't afford to lose this opportunity to integrate climate considerations into our growth model. That really is what we need to focus on in various ways. Because if we get locked in, then we lose the chance. Last point I wanted to make, I was in China a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know exactly where the world's going to go, but it seems to me that the Trump administration's tariff policies and its attack on China may and could cause some rethinking of our own relationship with China. And I think a bit like the rest of Asia, if India were to play, shall we say, a more constructive role as a part of Asia, rather than aligning itself or being forced to align itself with American supply chain or America-centric supply chains, I think that there is a big opportunity to take advantage of technologies coming out of China to build our growth model to great advantage. So I hope that there is that kind of pragmatism, that politics will allow that, but time will tell.
Yeah, very interesting point there, Rajiv. And Navroz, you were sharing the example of what Brazil is doing. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I wouldn't mind actually picking up where Rajiv left off. I think it's a really important point. I was actually going to sort of echo that a little bit, that in a sense there's a real moment here of potential realignment and sort of figuring out what interests are complementary. So, China is going to need markets. India is going to need technology in this green space. And so there's really the space for a fruitful conversation there. I think that and of course, India's built a very strong relationship with the US. I think that can continue. I think diplomatically that there's a lot invested in that, and by no means need this be zero sum if India plays it correctly. And I'm not suggesting it should be. Whether that's manageable in the political constraints is another question. But in order to do this, then, and this is just sort of, I guess, an observation, I feel like we still in India, in the corridors of power, view development and climate as sort of separable things. So when it comes to funding as well, it's about, saying, well, what's our development funding and what's our climate funding? And in a sense, that's actually really kind of playing into a very wrong-headed view of the climate problem as a carbon regulation problem that comes with costs. The problem is not regulating carbon for India, because actually our emissions are growing. The problem is avoiding carbon by how we build our freight corridors, how we build our cities. And so those are investment decisions. So I personally don't think carbon markets will do that much for India. First of all, the price won't be high enough. And it's not going to shape investment decisions in the same kind of infrastructure decisions in the same kind of way. And it's not going to shape technology innovation decisions in the same kind of way. The state has to be involved in that through, for example, creative engagement with China and through industrial policy and so on and so forth. We can only do that if we think that climate and development goals go together. So that is kind of a ground zero point that I don't think we've quite got over that hump in India. And again, I don't want to leave adaptation out of this and resilience. That's an even stronger point in India. You don't want to build cities in floodplains. You don't want to build cities, in coastal areas that are subject to storm surges. You want to be aware of higher intensity storms. You want to be thinking about more frequent drought and more unevenly distributed rainfall when you think of your crop patterns. So we have to internalize these. I guess that's the fundamental point. Maybe just one last observation tied to this. If you take that point of view, then you look at policy in a much more nuanced and complicated way. You don't look at silver bullet policies. You don't look at, now I've put a PLI and I'm halfway there. You look at packages of policies, complementary packages, some of which are about imposing costs on carbon, some of which are about providing subsidies to technology, some of which are about enabling just transition. And how do you make these work together? So that more complex policymaking environment is, in a sense, and now I'm coming back finally to where you asked me to go, is in the sense the idea of these national platforms. The national platform says, here's where we're going, and here's the set of policies that in an interlocking way get us there. And to link back to Rajiv's point, then once you have that vision and that predictability, it lowers the risk for private capital, right? Because there's a political buy-in into it. So ideally, that would lower the risk for private capital. So that's kind of the how I like to think about joining the dots.
Yeah, fantastic. I know we have just a minute left, so we won't be able to get to all the other questions in the chat, but hopefully the audience has gotten a lot, at least in my mind, the framing, like I'm leaving with a lot of pearls, and maybe just one note to end on in an action-oriented way. How can the Indian diaspora support climate action, and how can we leverage this tremendous power of the community we have here? Anybody who wants to take a shot. Thanks to Nikhil for asking this.
I'll just take a crack. I mean, I just look at the quality of the panelists we have here, and people spread all over. And I think it's about creating that exchange platform, but we're taking these ideas back home. And I think creating that bridge between all the wisdoms that exist is going to be, we all can play a part. It's not going to be one person, or certainly in the context of India, it needs a whole village to raise a child, and let's put it this way. So I think, all of us can play a part, and all of us have a duty given their heritage and the background. So I think everybody needs to lean in.
Yeah, but just to add to that, I mean, I think the voice of the diaspora could be used to amplify the message that this is a really important pivoting moment for India, and we should not waste it. I think there was a nice piece, I think it was in the FT the other day, about this debate being revived in India. And this is a really good time for the diaspora to weigh in with an encouraging message that please take advantage of this moment to pivot precisely to what we've all been talking about. Integrate climate considerations into your development model. That's the best way ahead to get to Viksit Bharat.
I would just add one point. In addition to just leveraging the expertise and networks of the diaspora, I think supporting the grassroots movement, they can really empower, and diaspora can really empower local communities in India by supporting the grassroots organizations and really looking at the ecosystem approach that Navroz was talking about. So one is, of course, the advocacy and policy influence that a lot of research institutions and technology groups are working on, but I see the real need in terms of funding community-based projects and just promoting the climate education or just enhancing resilience, right, in vulnerable regions. And I think Indiaspora can play a huge role in that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for all of those thoughts, and leaves this community some action items to work on and be a part of the movement. Thank you so much, Navroz, Rajiv, Parminder, and Neelima. Amita, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, so much. MR looks like they've given us some homework, so we need to keep working on
Yes.
that. I want to especially thank this panel and introduce MR, the founder and chairman of Indiaspora. He needs no introduction, but I'm introducing him anyway. And he is also the founder of Corporate Eco Forum since 2007. I'll pass it on to you, MR, our Indiaspora's own climate guru.
Thank you. I don't claim to be a guru, but I'm Indian. But any case, this has been a riveting discussion so far, right from the very beginning. And to continue that in the spirit of nonpartisanship, we have two terrific people who will join me now. And this will be a civil discourse between a Republican and a Democrat. How about that? So we have Neil Chatterjee, who was in the prior Trump administration. He was the chair of the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and has been on the Republican side for a long time. And on the other side, we have David Livingston, who's the chief strategy officer at Galvanize, a very large venture capital and private equity firm investing in climate. He was in the prior two administrations, the Obama administration and also the Biden-Harris administration. So we have two amazing people with us. And we want to start by asking them both their perspective on energy. There's a whole debate today, Neil and David, between energy security and energy independence, and what happens there for the United States. So Neil, you want to jump in and describe your landscape today in terms of where we're at?
Yeah, great. And thank you again for having me. I think, I tend to look at things from the standpoint of energy demand. This is something that we're going to have to confront in the US in a way in which we really haven't had to for the better part of the last 2 decades. We've had relatively flat demand for energy and electricity in the US. And that is about to be totally upended by technologies like AI and data centers necessary to support AI, and crypto and Bitcoin mining and semiconductor manufacturing, a reshoring of manufacturing in the US, vehicle electrification, building electrification. All of these things are incredibly energy intense in nature and are going to require a tremendous amount of electric power. How we procure that power in a way that enables Americans to have not just a reliable source of energy and electricity, but also an affordable one, in my view, is going to upend energy politics. I think today there's no question the incoming Trump administration is very much focused on the ethos of the first Trump administration and the campaign of kind of drill, baby, drill, with a heavy emphasis on fossil fuels and taking a negative view towards cleaner sources of energy. I think over the course of time, that is going to change. Donald Trump essentially made 2 promises to the American people when it came to energy. One was to win the AI race for national security purposes with an understanding that that will require a tremendous amount of electric power. And 2 was to significantly bring down the cost of electricity for Americans who are suffering under inflationary pressure. In order to achieve those 2 objectives, I think both political parties in the US are going to have to reevaluate their thinking. On the political left, I think there has to be a recognition that we cannot possibly meet the coming surge in demand for energy while maintaining reliability and affordability without fossil fuels for the future. Particularly natural gas, we're going to need it. And I think on the political right, there has to be a recognition that we can't possibly meet this surge in demand with fossil fuels alone, that we will need solar and storage and hydrogen and nuclear, and also negawatts like demand response and energy efficiency and distributed energy resources. And I think that we have an opportunity, really driven by AI, to rethink how the political process evolves around energy policy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Neil. And David, over to you. What is your response?
Well, I have to say it's less of a response and more, unfortunately, of a nodding agreement. I think Neil is spot on. I mean, I have always considered myself a pragmatist, including when working with Secretary Kerry on advancing a sort of thoughtful and well-managed energy transition. It's now clear, to Neil's point, that we're engaged in an energy transition that's also an energy addition. The world is hungry for more energy, particularly in developed economies and in the United States, and certain key corridors in the United States, including Northern Virginia, deeply hungry for new electrons. And I think that if you look at where the demand for those new electrons is coming from, yes, it's manufacturing. Yes, it is just sort of traditional drivers of load growth, but of course we also have this AI infrastructure boom that's an overlay that's giving us a dramatic re-rating upwards in the sort of load growth that we've seen in the past several years. In fact, actually, the past couple of decades. What's unique about that I want to point out is that the drivers of that, the so-called hyperscalers, right? The Google, the OpenAI, the Meta, the Netflix, the Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft of the world, have a higher willingness to pay than perhaps your traditional sources of marginal electricity demand. And there's probably also, if you consider this to be an AI race, this race for AI sovereignty, AI dominance, as Neil was saying, you consider this also to be something where time is a commodity, then there's a higher premium as well placed on speed to power. What can you get deployed, built on the grid fastest? And I think when you look along both of those dimensions, as Neil pointed out, this administration, any utility, regardless of your ideological background or position, is probably going to find that there's a very significant role for renewables, in particular solar plus storage, as both a option which is increasingly cost competitive with new build gas, especially when you consider that you talk with Siemens, GE Vernova, et cetera, there are bottlenecks in the supply chain of aeroderivative turbines in particular, that mean that if you want to sort of get a new CCGT built, get in line, and it's not going to be something that you build before 2030, given some of the bottlenecks in that supply chain. And so the costs also are looking more like $2,000 a kilowatt upwards. That means that not solar plus storage starts to become very cost competitive on a new build basis with new gas, and is actually faster to build as well. You're talking 12 to 24 months. Even with some of the trade and tariff disruptions that we've seen, you're adding, a few hundred basis points on the total utility scale solar project cost. You're still in the money. It's still, a good option in terms of speed to power. And then, to Neil's point, it also puts an increased importance on the existing gas fleet and the role of gas peakers in accommodating some of that new, both intermittent renewable as well as somewhat smoothed out renewable with 4-hour storage equipped to it, that's going to be coming on the grid in many of these places. To Neil's other point on negawatts, I think negawatts and flexibility, grid flexibility, new technologies that allow us to get more out of our existing grid, what some call grid enhancing technologies. Our venture growth team is invested in a company called Veer, that's a reconductoring firm that enhances the capacity of existing power lines using new innovative technologies and materials. There is going to be an increased premium on new AI-based software control layers for grids so that we dispatch resources more intelligently in an orchestra, in a symphony rather than a cacophony of different resources on the grid. And I think that there's also going to be an increased role over time for virtual power plants and other ways of harnessing sort of the flexible load that we have on the grid in ways that allow us to reduce system costs, reduce costs for consumers, get the most out of what we have, even as we importantly, by the way, work towards building the next generation of baseload technologies, SMRs, perhaps a renaissance for also the traditional Westinghouse AP1000 style large-scale nuclear, but that's a 2030 story. And then heading into the 2030s, even as some will deploy some new gas, I think there's also an exciting role for things like enhanced geothermal. Companies like Fervo that are leading the way on taking lessons from the shale revolution and applying it towards clean baseload electricity using the Earth's heat. So the U.S. has a lot of options in front of it. And I think that anyone, regardless of ideological stripe, is going to sort of say, okay, we're just net short electrons. How do we get the most out of today's grid? And how do we get new resources deployed the fastest?
Great. Great response to that. And I think I see some violent agreement between the two of you at this point. But, earlier today we had a talk from Varun Sivaram. Both of you probably know him as well, who's now at the Council of Foreign Relations. And he started talking about climate realism. And that's what I see from both of you here is pragmatism, realism, whatever you want to call it. So in that vein, the United States is marching forward both with fossil fuel, but also with new technologies. One of the things that he pointed out at that time was that most of the emissions in energy is not coming from the US, right? It's coming from China and India and all the growing markets. So what is the United States' role in creating technologies, exporting technologies from here to kind of solve the overall energy crisis throughout the world? Neil, any ideas?
Yeah, one of the exciting things that I got to work on during my tenure as Commissioner and Chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is I actually signed several memorandums of understanding with my counterpart agencies in India, with CERC, with the PNGRB, and the MOUs were predicated around the idea that the U.S. would not actually try to export a commodity or sell something to the Indian government, but what we would do was provide our expertise. We in the U.S. have had tremendous success in deploying markets when it comes to energy and electricity, capacity markets, energy markets, ancillary services markets. And in our multi-decade experiment with markets, we've learned a great deal from what works and what doesn't work. And what we've been able to do is squeeze carbon out of the U.S. power sector without sacrificing reliability and while driving down costs. And that has had tremendous benefits for consumers, for the economy, and for the environment. And so what we tried to do, and the program was maintained by my successors at FERC, was engage with India and basically enable our Indian regulatory counterparts to learn from us so they could design a grid that is not just sustainable in India, but one that could provide reliable service while bringing down costs and driving down emissions. And I think that is obviously a clear role that the U.S. can play, in addition to things like exporting commodities like liquefied natural gas. I'll point out that we in the U.S., even though LNG is a fossil fuel, it is still displacing dirtier sources of fuel overseas, including in India, including in parts of Southeast Asia. And having U.S. LNG displace more fossil-intense sources of fuel actually does play a role in lowering global carbon emissions. And so I think there's a lot that the U.S. can do in this space. And I have firsthand experience with India specifically on how the U.S. can leverage our experience and expertise to help our allies design a grid for the future.
Awesome. And I know, David, you had a lot of work done as well in the Kerry, with Secretary Kerry and so forth. What's your take on the U.S.'s role in energy across the globe?
Well, to Neil's point, I mean, the U.S. is still the engine of energy innovation globally. China obviously plays a pronounced role in terms of the manufacturing of what one might call mature commodity clean energy technologies. But India is increasingly seeking to kind of come in there and play that role as well, right? And not cede that market completely to China. I view it'll be interesting to see where bilateral trade negotiations with India shake out under this administration. But if the Trump administration is pragmatic and sort of open-minded and big tent about this, there's a real opportunity to not only increase the role of U.S. hydrocarbons at a lower carbon footprint than India's coal in helping them reduce their emissions, clean their air, et cetera, so long as there is attention paid to the upstream methane emissions in the United States, which is an important caveat I would just add. But not only that, but there's also a role to help India to diversify supply chains globally of the sorts of technologies we're going to need to get the cheapest possible electrons on our grid here in the United States. So as you see the U.S. putting tariffs on certain Southeast Asian countries that it believes have, played a role in sort of circumventing China circumventing tariffs on the export of solar and other clean energy commodities and inputs that it believes that have been dumped or sold at below market or with unfair competition. There's a real opportunity for India to step up here and play a bigger role, not only in deploying clean energy, but also in global clean energy supply chains. As a manufacturer of solar and solar inputs, wind and wind turbine inputs, et cetera. That hopefully can come out of a more stable equilibrium from these U.S.-India negotiations. In addition, we did a lot of work, obviously, Secretary Kerry, myself, in the past administration, engaging with India on their energy transition and helping to strengthen the partnership between the U.S. and India. Now with Galvanize, we're looking at India as one of the most exciting markets in the world, and one which is actually a unique position given the kind of trade and geoeconomic bipolarity that we see between the U.S. and China. This is really, India's decade and decades ahead. It is an incredibly fast-growing market. You have multiple, scale renewable developer champions in India. We, through our public equities fund, are very familiar with Renew, which is an incredibly professional company and well-run company that's developing renewables at scale in India. I think that is a large enough market that is going to give birth not only to a couple of new sort of large scale players, but it's also going to create regional players that go outside of India's borders and increasingly are incredibly important players in the region as well. I think it's in the US's interest to find ways to link up very closely with that and to intertwine ourselves even more with India. And then finally, the thing I would just say is we face actually many of the same challenges, especially when it comes to building out the grid, when it comes to building out transmission cables, to dealing with, sort of NIMBY issues and traditional sort of land, and right-of-way issues with farmers and different challenges such as that. So to the degree that we can implement also reconductoring technologies, grid enhancing technologies, the use of drones for better transmission cable laying, this whole suite of sort of technologies that can help us build out the backbone of our energy systems faster, more effectively, and with less disruption. That's a huge area, I think, for U.S.-India cooperation down the road also.
Great. Neil, let me come to how do we advance our infrastructure and product set in the energy sector itself? So are there some new technologies you see on the horizon that can help improve the grid in the United States, help improve efficiency? Can you talk a little bit? I'm sure you've been approached by lots of technology companies and others. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what you're seeing out in the market?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of exciting innovation out there. Look, we need to build more in this country, and particularly when it comes to energy infrastructure, whether it be electric transmission lines to bring more energy onto the grid, or natural gas pipelines to deliver gas to regions where we're short capacity. And in the interim, because it is a challenge, as David pointed out, to build in the U.S., and we do need legislative permitting reform to better enable us to overcome things like NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, which is not political, it's not ideological. Americans don't want energy infrastructure coming through their property, whether it's a transmission line to deliver clean energy or a pipeline to deliver gas. And so that's a hurdle. And so while we wrestle with that hurdle, we need to look to technologies like grid enhancing technologies, like dynamic line ratings or ambient adjusted ratings that enable us to get the maximum amount of efficiency out of our existing energy infrastructure. We need to look to AI and a consumer marketplace that better enables efficiency and the utilization of innovative AI technologies to make energy consumption more efficient in the US. We need to get ahead of things like wildfire risk and mitigate some of those risks. And we can use satellite imagery and AI in that regard. So there's a lot of exciting things that technical innovation can do. I was proud when I was at FERC of proposing initiatives that removed barriers to entry for technologies like aggregated distributed energy resources. Here, think rooftop solar or electric vehicles or advanced appliances, plus energy storage, and enable these resources to be compensated for all of their attributes in the markets. It's these kinds of, proactive, regulatory mechanisms that can be used to drive the growth in deployment of these innovative new technologies that are great for the environment, but also for consumers and the economy.
Great. And David, you have a vantage point of all the new stuff coming down the horizon. Are there one or two technologies you look at that can really, maybe not a silver bullet, but get us on a track to do better in the energy space in the US, both within the country in terms of security, but also in terms of helping the globe?
Look, as you noted, there are no silver bullets here. I mean, I think the one thing that is transferable from finance to energy is that it is the best thing is to have a robust and diversified portfolio. The future is uncertain. We thought we were in a period of stagnant load for decades to come. Turns out we're in a period of load growth, right? You can't predict where there are going to be wars, where there are going to be trade wars, where there are going to be tariffs, the volatility of fossil fuel prices. So a portfolio approach is always best. In the near term, I am most excited by technologies that help us get more out of the grid and help get more out of the flexibility of resources that utilities and energy companies are managing globally. There's a great company that's born in the UK, but has now become a really global energy player called Octopus Energy. We were one of the first investors in them, really innovative utility for those who are familiar with it in the UK. They have a software system that's now open to any utility in the world called Kraken, that's helping to manage both the customer experience and sort of the assets on the grid in a much more intelligent way. Those sorts of AI enabled, AI is not just a source of energy demand, it's also a solution for many of our challenges. And it's going to help us, again, have this orchestra of different resources act as a symphony instead of a cacophony on the grid. So when it comes to the sorts of software that Octopus is developed with Kraken, when it comes to companies like Ascend Analytics that are doing similar things to help manage today's resources on the grid better, and then also companies like Veer that are getting more out of the physical grid today. That's the best thing in the near term that excites me. And then over the medium term, I think that things like enhanced geothermal are the perfect complement to the nature of demand we have coming from data centers, right? Clean 24/7 baseload energy that you can co-locate next to a data center in places like, Nevada, in places like Utah, in places like Virginia and Data Center Alley. That's really exciting. And then I think in the medium term, that's sort of the next wave of energy technology that's going to be commercialized at scale. And then, of course, US maintains a strength in the next wave, things like fusion, et cetera, that excite so many of us and that have benefited from sustained US government R&D support over the years as well.
Great. And Neil, I'll let you close out the session. We're out of time. What do you see happen in the Trump administration over the next 4 years in terms of energy and energy security?
Yeah, look, I think they're going to surprise people. I do think we're going to see the administration shift away from drill, baby, drill, and that heavy emphasis on fossil fuels and look more to winning the AI race while bringing down costs for Americans. I also think that while they will not couch their rhetoric in regards to these policies in the language of climate change, make no mistake, some of the policies they will pursue, including on the trade front, will have positive benefits to lowering in terms of lowering global carbon emissions. So you may see the administration deleting references to climate, across various government agencies, and I know that can be dispiriting to folks. But if you actually take a step back and look at the policies I believe the administration will pursue over the next 4 years, I believe that, much like at the end of the first Trump administration, we will see a decline in carbon emissions coming out of the second Trump administration.
Great. On that positive note, I want to thank both of you, David and Neil, for your great perspective, and I'll turn the floor back to Amita on our side. Thank you.
Thanks, MR. Take care.
Thank you, David, Neil, MR. I'd like to introduce you now to Dr. Eric Dinnerstein, the Director of Biodiversity and Wildlife Solutions at Resolve, and Dr. Hrishita Negi, who's the Associate Director, Tigers United Clemson University, and she's also a trained classical dancer. Welcome, Dr. Dinnerstein. Welcome, Hrishita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be invited here. Today, we're going to talk about some critical issues. We've already heard about the elephant in the room several times. In this session, we're actually going to talk about the elephant in the room, or elephants near the village. We've heard about AI. You'll see two images here of a tiger very close to an AI camera alert system, and an elephant having its picture taken by AI recognizing it, and how this all applies to India. But first, I want to say that the real elephant in the room that we've been missing out on today is how climate stabilization and biodiversity conservation are interdependent. We've heard so much about climate today and the climate crisis, but without solving the biodiversity crisis, we can't solve the climate crisis, and vice versa. So you'll see about this in two different ways that will bring this to the fore. I'm delighted to share this presentation with Dr. Hrishita Negi from Clemson University and Tigers United, and we'll be following this presentation on India's role in helping to conserve biodiversity. But this presentation is going to be a lot of, I think, facts that maybe many people in the Indiaspora are not aware of how vital India is in the role for biodiversity conservation. So the second part of the talk will be on India's role in protecting rare species in nature, led by Haley Mellin. But let's dive right into the role of India in conservation. So this is the most important slide of my part of the talk, is why is India the most important country for wildlife conservation? And there's 6 or more good reasons for that. The first is that India has the most of everything. It's the stronghold for charismatic species like 75% of the world's tigers, 70% of elephants, most of the Indian rhinos, despite only 5% of the country under formal conservation. It has the best protection of wildlife populations in the world. In fact, I would argue you could boil this part of the talk down to one sentence, which is that if the other countries of the world were doing as good a job as India as protecting their indigenous wildlife and biodiversity, it would be much less severe of a crisis than it is today. As an example of that, India led the way in doubling the number of tigers in 10 years, which was a goal that we created with the World Bank. India leads in coexistence strategies. So something that the audience might not know is that last year, there were 605 people killed by elephants and 116 killed by tigers. 40% of all tigers live outside protected areas. So in order for wildlife to prosper and to continue to increase, there has to be coexistence strategies. And it's our view that Hrishita will explain more of how India is going to lead the world from going from human-wildlife conflict to coexistence, and why it will happen in India first. India also has an amazing array of talent in the engineering sector, in the wildlife conservation sector, distributed among the governments, NGOs, universities, and institutes that can really promote new technologies to save wildlife. And finally, There's great 4G coverage. This might seem like an odd feature, but in fact, it's really critical because a lot of the technologies that we use to save wildlife requires real-time connectivity. India is probably the only country in the world that has extensive 4G network coverage alongside the perimeter and even within wildlife sanctuaries. So let's look now deeply at how India is doing in conserving their wildlife. We identified years ago in a paper 76 tiger conservation landscapes. This is the place where the 4,000 individual tigers population live. The two colors are the purple color are where India or the world could double the number of tigers, and then the flesh colored where it could not do so. But we've had this remarkable success of doubling the world's tiger population in the last 12 years, most of it driven by India. Related to the conversations about climate and carbon is an interesting fact is that the tiger conservation landscapes of the world hold 3 times the carbon reserves as areas that lack their tigers, where tigers have been lost. So having tigers in the landscape is correlative with having a deep sequestration of carbon. So it addresses both goals. Now, our understanding of tigers and wildlife in India has evolved over the last 50 years, often in parallel with advances in technology. So almost 50 years ago, we took a page from the books of the Maharajas of how they'd hunt tigers to actually count them. So there I am in a treehouse in our machan, waiting for a tiger to come by to take its picture with an old single lens reflex camera. But I was thinking, what if someday that could be automated and there could be cameras that would be triggered and take pictures of tigers? And what if someday that system could identify tigers as individuals? Well, jumping through a series of progressive steps we've made of using satellite telemetry collars to studying tigers, studying their movements. 50 years later, we now have this technology in hand where we can not only detect tigers using AI-embedded camera systems, but identify them as individuals. It just took a while, but now we're finally there and can apply this technology. We've been doing that across India, well, starting in a few states, in Maharashtra and also Uttar Pradesh and Odisha. The first example was detecting tigers and poachers in tiger reserves. India has 55 tiger reserves, almost unheard of from any other country to have that many for a given species. And this technology has been featured in CNN broadcasts, published in papers. But the basic idea is we can now use AI-embedded camera systems to give instant alerts in under 30 seconds to rangers, forest guards, villagers to know about the presence of tigers, to either stop poaching or warn villagers of the presence of tigers nearby and avoid conflict. That spread to elephants. So elephants, as I mentioned earlier, killed 605 people in India last year. One of the hotspots of this conflict is in West Bengal. The chief conservator of forests there, with her back to us, is talking to the DFO and learning about the new technology, which was deployed in a place where in the last 2 years, 12 people were killed and another 23 seriously injured by elephants. With the introduction of this technology, we were able to cut that to 0. By having these alerts that get to rapid response teams, they can get in the way between people and elephants, steer elephants to the forested areas, and prevent conflict. So here's examples of elephants being detected without being aware of it, sent to ranger stations, and then onto the rangers who go out and protect the wildlife and the people. Here's an example of using it for anti-poaching. This is not from us. This is the chief wildlife warden of Odisha state, who's been using the technology to not only identify poachers, but interestingly, in the state of Odisha, in the Simlipal Tiger Reserve, is the only place in the world where you have melanistic tigers, so tigers that are almost completely black. And these tigers are under threat from poachers. Through using the technology, we cracked the poaching ring, the rangers did, and these tigers are safer today than before because of the technology. Across India, we've been operating for 4 years now in a number of locations. We hope to scale to all 55 tiger reserves in the next 2 years, preventing a lot of poaching and conflict. This also offers an example, and we'll offer several more in the course of these 2 presentations, of where those who are listening can get more involved. Like the question I'm sure is coming up, as part of the Indiaspora, what can I do to help advance the goals of climate stabilization and biodiversity conservation? And one way is to help the spread of this technology across India and really lead the way for the rest of the world. Another neat feature is this is actually made in India. So this product is made at the VVDN factory in Manesar, where they're using the experienced engineers there to take advantage of what we're trying to do and scale this technology quickly. It's been featured widely in popular media, from Robert Downey Jr. in his show The Age of AI as an example of using AI on the edge to advance conservation, to our technology being named by Time Magazine as the best innovation or technology for 2023, and featured in PBS videos as well. One of the requests that we've had from Indian conservationists who said, this is marvelous technology from the government, says we'd love to deploy this, but you can figure out how to make your system much cheaper. If we could only come out with an AI-embedded camera alert system for less than $300, it could become ubiquitous and spread along park boundaries, along buffer zones, and protect wildlife and people. So now we've come up with this that we're calling our Sentinel Next Generation, just using the Banana Republic box to cover it up. But to show how small it is, it's next to a US quarter, or in my hand here, just to see how miniaturization, AI, and communications all come together in this tiny package that we can now produce. What I've showed you, the conservation and the technology, that conservation has been defined as 10% science and technology. The other 90% of conservation is community engagement and negotiation. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Hrishita Negi, who's going to explain that most important 90% and how that works in India. Hrishita.
Thank you so much, Eric. So as Eric mentioned, starting from 9 to now 55 intensively monitored and well-managed tiger reserve, India's conservation success is globally recognized. However, this very success of the efforts has ushered in a new set of challenges. These large carnivores now share space with 1.4 billion people, and that is in a country that averages 400 individuals per square kilometer. And that, of course, intensifies the risks of conflict. So while managing tiger within the reserves is a cornerstone for tiger conservation, the long-term success now hinges on the ability of India to be able to manage tigers outside of these protected areas. This necessitates integrated approaches, providing collaborative and innovative solutions that can balance wildlife conservation with the imperative to safeguard human lives, livelihood, as well as their well-being. Next slide. So what we've created to address these emerging challenges is a powerful collaborative model wherein Clemson University is the leadership as a founding member of Tigers United University Consortium, which is 4 land-grant institutions that leverage their ideas of shared tiger mascots, as well as their shared commitment to conserving wild tigers and empowering local communities. The program has formed multi-institution partnerships with several Indian government agencies, NGOs, and academic institutes, and that is what provides us with the key political, logistical, and on-the-ground support that is essential for the implementation and success of our projects in India. We get a multifaceted, action-oriented approach, and we work towards research, training, and capacity building, outreach, and community engagement initiatives. Next slide. So now I'm going to show how this collaborative model is helping in addressing challenges to coexistence in the central India landscape. A landscape, as Eric mentioned, is a global priority to tiger conservation, supports over 40% of tiger population. What we focused on is a 140-kilometer linkage of unprotected forest between Khana and Pench Tiger Reserve. This corridor, while critical for tiger movement, is saturated with tigers in recent years. These forests are also interspersed with 400 villages. The local population heavily depends on these forests for collection of fuel wood, other forest products essential for their daily needs and livelihoods. And these multi-use forests also serve as grazing land for livestock. In past few years, as represented in this map, hundreds of livestock are depredated each year by tigers. So along with growing threats to human life, this causes severely economic and emotional hardships to local communities. And this, of course, has risks of retaliatory killings towards tigers, so also threatening their survival in these shared landscapes. Next slide. So as a first step, what we did is we deployed TrailGuard AI camera system, which, as Eric mentioned, employs AI on the edge computing to help identify its species, combined with communication networks to be able to alert the managers as well. What we did is we used the livestock kill data to identify what the highest conflict regions were within the corridor, and we deployed 12 camera systems to help identify or use it for these two different use cases. The first was to deploy them to monitor at these trails that are in proximity to villages, and this was to test the system as an early or an alert warning system. The other was deploy them at livestock depredation sites to be able to monitor the carcass for potential poisoning in attempts to harming the tiger. This resulted in the first ever transmissions of wild tiger using embedded AI, and these notifications were received by the managers within 30 seconds. The rangers have emphasized that this provides critical and unprecedented surveillance of tiger habitats, calling the system as eyes in the forest. We also know that by detecting tiger movement that are deemed important near villages or in proximity to grazing lands, they are able to mobilize swiftly their resources, thus revolutionizing the responses to potential conflict situations. So this response, or this shift rather, from reactive to preventive action has also been a game changer in these shared landscapes. Next slide. I think you need to go one before. So what we also do is perform training and capacity building workshops. The goal here is to build the capacity of the rangers by providing multi-element training module that helps train them with cutting-edge technology so that they can help respond effectively to the increasing conflict situation. And the goal also is to strengthen their communication with the local communities. So with the training module and our workshops that have over 50 rangers in attendance, these rangers provide us with critical local insights on localized conflict scenarios, and that has been something that helped us in our understanding of the real-world applications of our technology and developing multi-use cases for the technology as well. Next slide. So what we do is we couple that with community engagement, as community participation is key in the success of implementation of such projects. So here the goal is to raise awareness and sensitization of the conflict-ridden groups, and we do so with education material, and we have themes that cover ecological and cultural values of tigers. We introduce the camera system and the purpose of our work near their villages. We have also trained and hired community stewards from these local communities and build their capacity so they're able to also monitor the camera system, report conflicts around their villages, and they also foster trust and communication between rangers and community members. Next slide. Alongside that, tiger habitats also safeguard sacred sites significant to several faiths, including indigenous communities that form deep cultural and historical linkages to tigers. So part of our work also documents some of these cultural specificities that enhances our understanding of the multifaceted nature of human-tiger interactions, as this often is the key of tolerance building mechanism. We also work with local communities, trying to provide sustainable livelihood opportunities by upskilling them in arts and crafts. We work with tribal artists specifically, and the goal there is to empower them economically while also safeguarding their cultural heritage. So the idea here is that the forward-looking strategy would have to partner with local communities and indigenous communities to elevate their partnership and role in tiger conservation efforts. Next slide. And lastly, recognizing that environmental education is something that can help foster positive human-wildlife interactions, we also like to empower and equip the youth and basically try to help them understand the localized environmental challenges. And we've created place-based curriculums that are designed, and the lesson plans are rooted in the local biophysical and sociocultural context, with the idea that it hopefully helps, this experiential learning hopefully helps them strengthen their connection to the environment and be better informed citizens. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Hrishita. That was excellent. And now we're going to move to the second part of the presentation to talk about India's critical role in protecting rare species on Earth. So this is the biodiversity crisis, and we've come up with an approach called conservation imperatives that identifies the most important places on Earth where we have species on the verge of extinction that are currently unprotected. And now Haley Mellin is going to take over and give that part of the presentation with our other colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Dinnerstein, and thank you, Hrishita, for that lovely presentation. Welcome, Haley. Haley, if you're speaking, I don't
There
think.
we are.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amita. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name's Dr. Haley Mellin, and we're grateful to one of the Indiaspora community members, Sanjeev Sidhu, for introducing us to MR and to this community. So we're very grateful to be the closing keynote. I'm with my colleagues Induja and Priyanka, and it's a pleasure to follow that lovely presentation from Dr. Negi and Eric. Eric is very humble, but he was the chief scientist for quite a long time with WWF, and now is chief scientist at Conservation X Labs. So today we're going to talk about conservation imperatives and why this matters. And we're going to be speaking a little bit about some of the topics that Varun spoke about in the beginning, this notion of climate realism. In truth, climate realism and land conservation go well hand in hand, because land conservation, as Eric pointed out, is one of the facets for a balanced climate, and it's a very doable thing to engage with and achieve. Conservation Imperatives is a paper that was published in Frontiers Journal, and it outlines 1.2% of the Earth's terrestrial surface, about 164 million hectares, that is crucial to about 80% of known species. So if we protect that 1.2%, it will prevent most extinctions. If you'd like to learn more about this sort of mapping, you can go to the Global Safety Net. I put a QR code there, and you can click on the magenta species rarity map. That 1.2% is something we're going to be focused on in the next 5 years and getting that land conserved first. My work is largely on land conservation, and over the last 8 years, we've supported about 30 million hectares of new conservation. And so this sort of action is very doable. This is done always locally led, which means on the ground protection and species determining how they would like to conserve, where they would like to conserve, and then looking to communities from a philanthropic perspective to come in and help. And so what we're talking about today is we're going to be launching a new civilian initiative called conserve.org that allows people globally to come forward and fund conservation imperative sites. And a lot of the work that's been done to prepare for today, which is a big deal for us as conservation biologists, has been on the ground action. So next we have a presentation by our colleague Priyanka. And Priyanka, would you like to introduce yourself? She's going to be speaking about conservation imperative sites in India and has done a lot of this research herself.
Thank you, Haley. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank Indiaspora for bringing us all together. It's truly an honor to contribute to the conservation, and thank you, Haley, for introducing the concept of conservation imperatives. Eric has already explained why India is the most important country for wildlife conservation. And to add to that, India is important because it is also among one of the top 10 countries globally that contains the maximum number of mapped conservation imperative sites. So I've joined the conservation imperatives team in identifying these sites in India. For this talk, I will focus on some of these sites identified in Himalaya, a landscape which is very close to my heart, because as someone who's grown up here and continues to work in the landscape, I've seen the beauty, fragility, and I realize the urgent need to protect them. So the Himalayas are one of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots. They are the origin of major rivers, regulate climate, and sustain billions of lives and livelihoods. Their vast range of altitudes, temperatures, and terrain creates a mosaic of unique habitats that nurture remarkable and often rare wildlife. But the ecosystems are under pressure from overgrazing, habitat loss, unregulated tourism, climate change, and more. Working with Resolve and the India Conservation Imperatives Working Group, I focused on identifying new protected areas in Himachal, a region of immense ecological and cultural significance. While about 15% of the state's land is already protected, there's still potential to do more in its remote high altitude regions. This work is also deeply personal, and my roots are here, and working with the Resolve for on-ground conservation gives me immense satisfaction. So I have identified, coming to the sites, I've identified these sites through extensive research and consultation with forest departments, communities, NGOs, experts at Wildlife Institute, and other NGOs. And based on that, I've identified some landscapes that can be legally protected in the states. I focused on greater and trans-Himalayan regions of Chamba, Lahaul Spiti, and Kinnaur districts in Himachal Pradesh. The identified sites either overlap with the sites that were mapped by Global Safety Net, or where that wasn't feasible, I selected areas that represent similar habitats, species, and ecosystems. Now, given the importance of involving local communities in the long-term conservation, the most viable approach identified was to propose these areas as conservation reserves under India's Wildlife Protection Act. Till now, I've identified 3 high-altitude landscapes that are ecologically significant and needs protection. These areas are depicted in the map. You can see here, Miyar is in the west, then Sarapchu in center, and Pin and Lipa Asrang Conservation Complex in the eastern part. These sites are more than just stunning landscapes. They are vital and yet currently unprotected ecosystems. Now I'll just go through these areas one by one. First is Miyar Valley, which covers 56,200 hectare area across Pir Panjal and Zanskar ranges. So previous scientific studies have already recognized it as a high conservation value landscape due to its rich biodiversity and vital ecosystem services. It harbors medicinal plants and provides habitat for rare species like endangered Himalayan brown bear. Next, please. The next site is Sarapchu, which is a vast remote stretch in the greater Zanskar region. This uninhabited landscape forms a vital link in trans-Himalayan wildlife corridors and supports species like Himalayan wolf and Tibetan argali. With minimal seasonal human presence, it remains one of the last truly undisturbed area in Indian Himalaya. Next is the Lipa Asrang and Pin conservation landscape located near the cold desert of Pin Valley National Park. If protected, it would link Pin Valley with Lipa Asrang, along with 6 other wildlife sanctuaries in the neighboring district of Kulu. So this landscape, the transboundary landscape, will help support seasonal movement and boost ecosystem resilience. And it will provide a vital habitat for wide-ranging species like snow leopards, regarding which Induja will speak more in detail. So that's all I have. Over to you, Induja. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. My name is Induja, and I'm from India, but right now pursuing my environmental conservation master's from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'll be mostly talking about a very interesting species that I recently started learning about, and one of our explorations is also about creating protected areas for snow leopards. So snow leopards are really the most interesting species, which actually kept conservationists and biologists from studying them for a long time. Because they are charismatic and they have an elusive character, which makes it difficult to spot them, to put any radio collar on them. So, for example, a lot of biologists and researchers have reported back in the days that even after years of research in field, they have never spotted snow leopard in their whole study period. All that they could study from were the footprints and also the fecal matters. These snow leopards are endemic to Himalayan ecosystem across India, Nepal, Bhutan, China, and Pakistan. And these are the top predators in this whole ecosystem, and they play a very crucial role in maintaining the ecological balance. And their presence also indicates good ecosystem health. And most importantly, in today's context, their presence indicates they serve as indicators for the effects of climate change on the Himalayan ecosystem, which is very, very important for us to note and take action on. And all these suggest that the importance of conserving snow leopard today, and because they also face a lot of anthropogenic threats such as habitat loss, decline in prey base, and illegal hunting, etc., and also a lot of human wildlife conflict. And so in India, before 2016, only 5% of the snow leopard habitat was studied. But today, with the technological advancements, AI technologies, we have about 80% of their habitat well studied, and which creates more scope for protection. And in a recent report from the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, the presence of 718 individuals have been confirmed. But the current status shows that only 34% of their habitat is under legal protection, and the remaining 70% still needs protection. And as we all know, hopes and possibilities have been driving a lot of conservation efforts all over the world. Now, the conservation imperatives in India, started by Conserve, bring such a possibility with the hope that snow leopard habitat can be protected by supporting creation of protected areas and conservation reserves in the Indian Himalayas. And Priyanka just showed us some of the potential sites to protect their habitat. And India's approach to protecting the snow leopard habitat is shifting more towards community and landscape-based conservation approaches rather than exclusive protected area approaches as before. And the conservation imperatives will also focus on similar approaches by establishing local partnership and to create a positive impact on people and the environment. I also personally believe in the power of strengthening the connections between people and the environment, and how reigniting the environmental stewardship in people is going to be a big tool to tackle the challenges faced by our planet today. And with that, I pass it on to Dr. Haley Mellin.
Thank you, Induja. I'd like to just express my thanks to this community and to say what a great treat it is to work with Induja and Priyanka on the Conservation Imperatives India Working Group. This is all being done week by week, month by month, to locate areas that can be conserved, that the national government is in favor of conserving, and that align with the most high biodiversity regions. It is being done in a very simple, direct, functional, affordable manner. And one of the fantastic parts about supporting biodiversity conservation is you're also supporting climate health, because a lot of today was talking about what do we build, how do we build better, how do we build smarter. Land conservation is very it's sort of the non-building. So essentially you're doing an invisible line around something and leaving it to be what it always has been. And just focusing on that protection of the heritage or the artifact of the landscape. Most of the conservation imperative areas are community areas, they're indigenous areas, they're First Nations areas. And so you're really looking to communities who want to conserve their landscape. So today we're launching an initiative called Conserve, which supports individuals in supporting the creation of new permanent protected areas. A permanent protected area is something like a national park, a state park, indigenous reserve, a community conserved area. A protected area always follows the land tenure on site. And so we're focusing today on Serap Chu. One of the exceptional things about land conservation is when you do it at a large scale, it's really affordable. So in the case of Serap Chu, you're looking at about $5 a hectare. And you're really working in community. You're working with many conservation partners. You're working in confluence with the national government. And you're looking at making a protected area that can be forever, that can live on after us. So really land conservation works on what we do in our families. We look at legacy. What is here after we're no longer here? So if you're interested in focusing on this, you can look at the website conserve.org. But really, it's trying to figure out the goal here, the mission here is how do we protect habitat for the biodiversity that's going to go extinct the earliest, because a lot of these species are 80 million years in evolution. And that is DNA, that's intelligence, that's wisdom that we don't want to lose. And we all need a home, like we all need habitat on which to ground ourselves. And so conservation imperatives is literally saying this. It's imperative to conserve these areas now. We all want to come together to do that. And it's very interesting because it's possible, and it's possible now. And so it's exciting. So acre by acre, hectare by hectare, we can get there as a team. I'm going to pass this to Amita for any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so great, right from Dr. Dinnerstein right up to the end of this presentation. I learned so many things about India that even though I grew up there, I had no idea. So thank you so much for sharing. There is a question here that I'd like to ask if you guys, there are several, but I'll ask this one to start with. There are lots of wild boars roaming around Punjab as stray animals causing very severe crop damage. These were not seen before. Are these a part of wildlife conservation and habitat that may be coming down the valley floor from hilly areas? Do you guys have any knowledge about this?
Yeah, well, maybe I can just say, and then hand over to Priyanka, is that wild boar are a big problem in a lot of countries. For those who are based in America, we never had wild boar as a native species. They've been introduced by hunters, and they've caused tremendous ecological havoc in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and other parks because of destroying the vegetation, eating birds' eggs. They're a problem in Hawaii where they're introduced. In India, in Punjab, there are a lot of places where herds of wild boar will roam around, sometimes quite widely. And it is a tremendous challenge for farmers to protect their crops, particularly the rice crop, during ripening. It's one of the other applications of our technology system that we can detect species that not only threaten human lives or livestock, but can destroy crops. And so that's a whole other dimension of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we can keep wildlife away from croplands. And there's a number of different interventions to do that, but this has hit on a really important problem that if we can address that, then you win over the support of local communities because you're protecting their livelihoods. So that's a major research and conservation thrust of our group to try to really scale our technology to provide these not only early warning systems, but when we detect, say, wild boar or elephants using the AI or tigers, is to have an automated deterrent that scares them away from the croplands.
Well, thank you so much. There are several other questions. I'll just choose one for lack of time. How can other countries incorporate India's conservation strategies?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I think all of us have answers on that, but I'm going to pass it to Priyanka because she's currently in India. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So maybe becoming more tolerant towards the wildlife. Like, for example, in India, we have a huge population, but still we are coexisting with these animals. We have strict rules regarding hunting, and then like similar steps we can take, like increasing the conservation areas and raising awareness, and likewise, yeah. And maybe you can add.
I would just like to add a little bit to that. The idea of environmental stewardship I mentioned, and also the idea of separating humans and environment, and being able to see the coexistence would be a great step, which is another difference is being now going through learning here in the West about conservation. That's the major difference I see, and I can see how things can definitely change and bring very positive outcomes if this interconnection is valued and is actually like treated as an imperative.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the recent conversations of the non-human and more than human debates, and some countries that are incorporating non-human species rights into constitutions. I think one of the great things we see from the Indian model as a country and history is the respect for different species. And you even have locations that are sacred sites that you don't need to hire rangers for because there's such a spiritual respect for the landscape and the species that everyone works together in harmony. So I think really it's a it's a wider ethos, right? We're talking beyond legal, beyond the law, but we're talking about an empathy and understanding and a respect for the fact we are one point in the web of life, and the web of life is interrelated, it's intra-connected, and we need it to continue to flow. And I think so one of the things we're looking at with permanent conservation, it's amazing you fund it once and there's this new designation that it's permanent, is that we really want to respect the earth that has given us life. And that earth understands its balances. That earth has its own intelligence and wisdoms. And that's something we can learn from and teach our children from. Eric, I think you had a final thought on this. I kind of noticed.
Oh, sure. Just that what we can learn from India, a great deal, obviously, but what comes to mind immediately is why conservation has been much more successful in India than other places is the political will is there, that the governments, with missteps, like any government, but there's been the commitment there to set these ambitious goals and do everything possible to achieve those. You wouldn't achieve that, though, without the community engagement and support. And so the efforts that, like what Hrishita is leading and others like her, is critical. And then the financial resources to undertake some of this. So India is in a better position than a lot of other countries, but nonetheless, they've devoted those resources. They've made that political decision to put the money into conservation, which we have not seen replicated in other places. So that's a great lesson for India to teach other countries. And then finally, I would say we need to be really smart about introducing, as we've heard throughout the presentations today, on energy, clean energy, is bringing in the most disruptive, latest technologies that can be force multipliers to make the goals much more achievable. And now with new AI-embedded camera alert systems, drones, all sorts of other technologies, I find that the Indian government is much more open to experimenting and deploying this to achieve these conservation goals than other countries. So there's a lot to be learned here.
Thank you so much. I think the point about respecting Earth, the planet that's keeping us all here, I think that you made, Haley. I think I'll end with that note. I do want to share. So thank you, Haley, Induja, Priyanka, Dr. Eric, and Hrishita so much for this. To end this session, we have an amazing short film by award-winning filmmaker Amoghavarsha. He just released this film for Earth Day, and this is the first time that they're broadcasting it to a large audience. So I'd encourage all of you to stay back for the next 5 minutes. It's a short film, and it goes perfectly well with the conservation theme that we just talked about. So thank you, everyone. I'll just play the film now.
Look out into the distance, like I'm thinking, but actually there's nothing in my head at all.
A decade ago, I stood on Australia's rugged shores, gazing across the vast Indian Ocean. The same waters that shape this land nourish mine back home in the Western Ghats. And now I have the privilege of introducing two Aussies to my backyard, the High Commissioner Philip and the Consul General Hilary. Our mission to track down this forest's iconic species and uncover the secret of why Philip enjoys hiking in some of the harshest terrains on Earth.
It's a way to engage with people. There are things that you are enjoying in the environment together, but over the experience of a hike, of whatever it is, you have an opportunity to really have a good engagement with people.
Just a few kilometers in, and we've already encountered the rainforest's most iconic residents, the lion-tailed macaque.
Monkeys are a bit of a problem, or at least they were a bit of a problem on our compound in Delhi. Our senior administrator had a very clever idea, a unique idea in the Australian Diplomatic Service. We have a monkey frightener. So there's this guy, sort of big guy, who can make an extraordinary anti-monkey sound. Like the biggest anti-monkey sound you can imagine. Ooh! Except 10 times that sound. Anyway, I don't know if he gets paid by the grunt or paid by the hour, but whenever he sees me, he makes sure he makes a very big monkey noise. I don't know whether he thinks he's scaring me or whether just wants to show he's doing his work.
Deep into the rainforest, the weather begins to shift. The rain, a life-giving gift from the Indian Ocean, awakens the forest.
It's monsoon at the moment. Everything is singing. I can hear water rushing. And so I've had the opportunity to walk around, walk through the rainforest, experience what that is like. It's not something that's very easy to do in Australia. Our climate is generally very different.
The rain awakens the forest, but it comes at a price. Leeches.
There is the odd thing called leeches around, and they need to be watched out. My new thigh-high leech socks, which I actually think look pretty good, as well as keeping the leeches very much at bay.
Leeches are a small bother. This forest is home to creatures far more dangerous, and one of them is here.
I don't know how big I thought they were in my head, but this one was big.
My God, we saw a king cobra, as well as thousands of other things.
With that close call behind us, we are ready for the summit just ahead.
Hiking also has the ability to clear the mind. I don't go on hikes to think about work, but actually, when I do think about work, I have some of my better ideas. I think the mind is somehow uncluttered.
As we reach the top, the rains clear, unveiling the breathtaking majesty of the Western Ghats. And just when we thought we'd seen it all, we hear the musician of this forest sing to us. The Malabar whistling thrush.
Well, here we are in one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in India. And the view is just opening up, so you can see the gorgeous rainforest. It's just the three of us and about 10,000 leeches. Apart from that, it's just us. I want to thank my mate Amog here for taking us to this extremely beautiful place. I suspect I'm the first Australian High Commissioner to make it here, but I don't think I'll be the last. I'll be recommending it to everyone. This last weekend, very special for me. What a super place this is.
This is a UNESCO-listed World Heritage Site. The Western Ghats are recognised internationally as somewhere where the biodiversity is so significant that it requires protection and recognition.
A rare few get to experience this part of the world, and I'm grateful to have shared this place I call home with Philip and Hillary. As we conclude our journey, we're reminded of a profound truth. Despite our differences as people and nations, we are all deeply connected in this magical home we share, Earth.
Look out into the distance like I'm thinking, but actually there's nothing in my head at all.
That's a great state to be in.
It's a boil. It's all boil in your hat.
How poetic.
Thank you, everyone, for joining Indiaspora's 5th Annual Climate Summit, the Western Hemisphere section. If you're up and would like to join the Eastern Hemisphere section, it's on at 9 p.m. Pacific this evening. And if not, you can watch it later as part of a recording. You can watch the live stream on our LinkedIn. Thank you all. Bye.